Hello everyone and welcome back to the next lecture. In this lecture we'll be talking about lighting, and in the previous one we already set up the lighting template, and if you haven't seen this yet, have a look at the previous lecture just to get familiar with what we have done here. So we have one shot coming in, we have our variable set on the top, we are on shot 1120, and let's just see what we can do here now. So the first thing what we want to talk about is the gaffer. So the gaffer is our toolbox in lighting. So right now we just have a dome light and that's all we got. Currently no file name. So let's just browse for an HDRI, which I have in our source folder. And I want to go for something more like nighttime. So let's just load that in and see what we get if that texture is being loaded up. And we have our HDR in the background. So this is kind of setting our basic lights. So let's just say we want to create a few lights. And let's just create a few area lights, quad lights. So it's all Q for quad light. And this would be our key. So let's just rotation key 01 and maybe a front fill or something like that. So let's just add a fill all Q as well. And this would be our fill 01. There's no need to be that specific right now for the names. Obviously it's helpful if you have descriptive names for that. And let's maybe just add a rim light, rim 01. So these are my base lights. So what I want to do is, if I want to do sequence lighting right now, obviously you would, if you have your action happening in the same place or in a very similar place, what you can do is do some rough lighting for your main shot. So what I want to do now is just have the key, and I want to click that little eye icon here and make sure that my sync selection is in and out. If I click key, it's selected in the scene graph, and now I can view through that location. And let's just say we want to have a key light, which is like a bit side-lit light like that. And for the rim, we want to do a really backlit shot, maybe something more in that area. And then we have a fill light, which we might just do from the front, or kind of similar with like in an angle from the camera, maybe something like that. And then obviously light scale plays an important role. So the larger your light sources, the softer your specular responses. So as in a night light, we mostly want to have pretty hard shadows because we have small direct light sources everywhere. So let's just reduce our light scales a bit like that. And we can also soften or round our light shapes, but that's something we will be talking in a bit later in this lecture. So let's just see if I hit save and I make sure that my lights are active for interactive rendering like that. And now all I gotta do is look through this camera and maybe just hit render, and let's see what we get if I start a live render from our interactive output from the top here. Just hit live render and see what we get. Alright, and out of the box you can see now what we have here. We have all our little characters there. We've got our ground plane, and we've got this, obviously our HDR in the background. So what we want to do now is just play with these lights. So we can go to this drop down menu, go to node and click the gaffer. So we will display our gaffer now, and let's just head over to key. And let's just go to the settings of the common one, and let's just boost the exposure maybe by 10 and see what we get. Light is boosted, we get some key direction, we can see stronger shadows on the bottom there, and that's actually very great, and that's something we want to go for. So I find that the fill, or that the environment light, is pretty strong. And to isolate that view, we can just hit the solo key in the gaffer, which should isolate us from all the other lights. And in the dome light, we can set our lighting mood. So I want to go maybe 1.5 stops down. So just to make it a lot moodier, something like that. It's really dark. And also for now, just leave it at that. And let's just go back to the key light, or just remove our soloing here. Just click on the S so every light is back in action. And now we got the key back, and maybe just change our color to be a more blue. You can, I think you should have the Kelvin option somewhere. Maybe maybe they don't exist right here. Let's just search for if we have Kelvin. No, I think that is a M2A parameter. So if you want to change the color, let's just choose something more bluish. Go add a bit more saturation to this and then switch over to a blue color. That's maybe too cyan, a bit more blue. I think this could work. Hit OK and maybe just render the smaller portion here. And zoom in here, and this is now what we have with our key lighting. So this is kind of the basic idea to set up a key light. So we can angle it, obviously. If I view from this and I rotate it a bit more to be more front lit, we can do so very easily. I think though it is filling it a bit in too much, so maybe it just back off a bit, go maybe more top lit, and so we get a nice shadow on maybe on his torso from his own head. Let's see if we can get that done. And you can also click that little crosshair here in the Hydra view, enable that, and you can actually zoom in your view and offset it just to be easier, like so just that it's easier to move like that. We want something more like that, maybe. See if that works. And if not, obviously you can always play, but now you can see we get actually this nice shadowing on his chest and on the background guys as well. So pretty cool stuff. We can also try to adjust our cone angle. Right now this is fully 180 degrees. So what you can do in the let's just find it quickly. In the geometry, you can just adjust the spread to maybe 40 or something like that. And hopefully we can visualize that in the viewer. If I select my light, it's not really extending it, but you can see now that you can see these little angles. So we can see that it's actually angled it. So we can actually go a bit lower, maybe on the spread, maybe a value of 3. And that should be it to just angle the light a bit more. And the more you angle it, the brighter it gets. So we can back off on our exposure and in here maybe go down to 8. And what I also like to do is enable the disable the normalized mode. And if it's off, we can actually change the size of the light without affecting the overall lighting, or that's how it's supposed to be. If I make a big light now, oh, it actually is the way around. It's always a bit different for these packages. So right now, if you make the light source larger, you get more light. If you make it smaller, you get less light, which is a correct behavior. So if I have a small light source, I have less light but sharper shadows. So if normalize is on, you actually don't change the intensity of the light source. You don't change the intensity of the light when you scale it, you just change the shadow softness. So that's actually a very cool way to work. So we want to actually have small shadows, small light to get crisp shadows for our key light, and you can see immediately how it's working, and it's a very nice effect. So let's say this is our dialed in key light. So the next step would be to create or adjust the rim. So if you want to solo that, just hit the S key for rim, for the rim group to be soloed. And let's just view through the rim light, which is somewhere around here, and just boost that up. So first change the spread maybe to 0.4, make it a round light maybe with 0.6. And what that does, you can actually see it. If I zoom in here, it just gets rounder corners. It's just a bit more softer, subtle. We can also add a soft edge, maybe 0.4, which just softens the edges a bit more. So let's just boost up our exposure maybe to 6 and see what we get now. And we can clearly see that we get some nice rim lighting happening already. We want to keep it very subtle because it should not to be distracting. You still have your key source, which is your main light direction. And then what we can do, let's just try to something more warmer. So let's just change our color to be HSV, saturation, and maybe something more in the warmer tones like that. And hit OK and see what that looks like. If I make my region of interest a bit larger, we should see a bigger framing of the image. And you can see now this works actually pretty well. we get nice rim lighting, and I'm not so sure if we want to see that floor just yet, but anyways, we just keep it in, remove the solo mode, and just see how the picture looks in general. So this is now our key. You can see now the hot rim happening there, and I think the bounce or the floor is just too distracting right now. So what I want to do is just change the shader on that, and we have created the shader on the top here on the gray, and maybe just make it darker than 0.18, maybe 0.05, and we don't want as much roughness on it, so let's just bring that up to 0.7 and see if I restart the render what we get then. Alright, and now we can actually see how that looks. So we get our nice rim, and I reduce the intensity of the floor, which should all look a bit nicer now. It's not as distracting anymore. We don't get that much bounce from the bottom up, which is also great. And we can actually see some nice scattering happening in the head of this little guy. And all in all, I think the mood which we have here feels very good. So let's just see what we can do now. So what I like to do is enable depth of field, so we actually can blur out the background and all that stuff. So to get that working, what we need to do is create a node which enables us to enable depth of field. And we have a node called Arnold camera settings, and we just drop that in and edit that node. So what it expects is a location to our render camera, and because we have a working template, all we got to do is add a custom path or a direct path to our main shape camera. So this is our render camera, and all we got to do is enable depth of field here and play around with the focus distance. So let's just start a live render and see what that does. So I just removed the Arnold camera render settings. I think it doesn't really work with the live updating. So I just went back to my AGS main, and in here I just went to the camera rollout, camera default settings, and enabled the depth of field slot. So now we have the option to change our distance and to change the aperture. So I just tried a value of 10 for the distance, and we can see he's almost in focus already. So if I boost my aperture maybe by 1, we should get a very blurry background. And I think he's almost in focus. Let's just try maybe a value of 11 for him. If now he's out of focus, yeah, so maybe a value of 9, which might be the other extreme. So a value of 10.05 maybe, just to try to get him really crisp. So I think the focus is almost on his face now. Maybe try 0.4. And I think something like that would work. So let's just render the whole image here and see how that looks now. We get a nice bokeh and everything, and all the rest of the characters are very out of focus. So I think that effect is a lot, like way too strong. So maybe try 10% of the aperture size, and now we get a better render, like more detailed for our heroes. And I think this is kind of the look we are going for. Right now this is our setup for that shot, and I think we can now go into our shot area and tweak the gaffer until we are happy with the result. So as we said before, we have our main gaffer on the top here. So let's just go into shot area and create another gaffer, but this time instead of adding new lights, we can click that wrench or the cogwheel in the top right corner and show incoming scene. So now we get the same contents from the top here, but what we can do, let's say I don't like the key light, it's too direct maybe. So I can go into the key, right click that, add up for editing, and now I can actually do some overrides on that key light. So if I select that and view from the key, I can actually now maybe zoom in a bit. I can just rotate it back like that, maybe a bit more down, something like that. And now my gaffer is updating the key light based on that shot I'm working in. And you can see now it has updated, and it's a very nice effect. Now it's a lot more rim lit or like side lit. We can barely see the face of him, which is a very cool looking effect. And I think we can add actually one more rim light, which is maybe something which is here on the top, like it's also called a kicker or something like that. So in our rim area here, just right click And because we are doing beauty lighting per shot now, we can actually add as many lights we want for this shot, but they will not exist in these other shots unless you create them in the top gaffer there. So I'm just creating another rec light, hitting Alt Q, which creates me that, and I can just call this maybe kicker. And if I view from that light, I just want to put it behind where I just showed you before. So now I'm just viewing from there, moving the light all the way to the back, and maybe something on the top, maybe something like that. And let's go a bit closer like that, and just go from the perspective view and change the scale of this to be a lot wider. Oh, we are right now scaling in all axes uniformly. So let's just get rid of this, make it a constant, and copy those values over like that. And now we can just scale it in Y without affecting the other ones. And let's just boost the exposure maybe to 10, just to see that we see something here. Do a solo mode on that kicker light. And right now we don't see anything. So it's a possibility that we just need to restart the render and see if that fixes that. And now just restarting the render, we can see now that we get this really hot rim. I want to angle it a bit more from the top and maybe a bit more to the side, and let's see where we get that hotter rim. And this is something what I like to see, is like these hot white edges, and you can see these pings on their heads right there. And let's just reduce the exposure a bit, maybe go down to 8. We don't want to add too much light, but something like that should work just fine. So now you can see our shadow is very soft just because we have a lot larger light source. If I scale it down, you should see that the shadow gets a lot crisper and more defined. And this is now obviously artistic lighting. I think this back rim should just be a lot softer just to get a nice breakup on our front shadows here. And then let's remove the solo mode and see how that looks with the whole image in place. And now we can see that we have the key, we have these little hot specks, we've got our lights and the rim lights. So this would be now a approach for one shot light setup. And what we can do now is have a play with the other shots and see what we can do. But we will be applying a few, we would first need to add the next Impodomatics and do quite a bit more work to get the other shots working. We would need to do some expressions to fix our project settings, so the length is adjusted based on the shot we are choosing, and we might need to do some other overrides. So, and also we would need to set up the output passes to get a shadow, and we would need to add a volume light. So all that will happen in the next lecture, and I just wanted to show you a first introduction to shot lighting, and we will do a bit more in-depth stuff in the next lecture. So thank you guys for tuning in.